You destroyed our expensive drone, you vandal. We're suing you for everything. She screamed it in my face, slammed the papers against my door, and smiled like she already owned the outcome. My only crime, she said, was knocking their surveillance toy out of the sky after it hovered outside my 16-year-old daughter's bedroom window at dawn. My name is Rex Caldwell, 45 electrician single dad. And for 6 months, my suburban dream turned into a slow-rolling nightmare that smelled like diesel and entitlement. When Sage and I moved into Willowbrook Estates, I thought we'd found quiet streets and predictable neighbors, the kind of place where the worst scandal was whose hedges were overgrown. 18 days in that little fantasy died with a clipboard-bearing grin named Delilah Winters. Delilah showed up with a measuring tape, a smile sharp enough to cut, and a talent for turning ordinary life into a ledger of fines. Shed too close to your property line, $50. Mailbox paint not exactly the approved shade, $200. Leave a basketball hoop in the driveway at 3 in the afternoon, $300. She had the language of covenants memorized and the moral compass of a parking meter. I showed her city permits, municipal code, common sense. She clicked her pen and wrote me a fine. I'm an electrician. I document things. It's part habit, part survival. I started photographing every citation, filming her visits, logging times, and recording the sound of gravel under her Mercedes as she prowled neighborhoods like a white shark. Call it paranoia, call it professional caution, whatever. I just didn't trust the way the HOA started talking about enhanced security measures at the monthly meeting, and I certainly didn't like the way Garrett Bloom, vice president and perpetual clipboard holder, nodded like he'd just been asked to pilot a surveillance state. They bought a drone, fancy equipment, taxpayer quality invasion of privacy paid out of the so-called Security Enhancement Fund, $5,000 no vote. The thing buzzed over barbecues, hovered over backyard pools, and gave kids the creepiest kind of audience, a mechanical eye focused on normal family life. I asked right there in the meeting, "What's your policy on privacy?" Delilah's smile froze the room. "Community standards supersede individual privacy expectations," she said. The sentence sounded like something from a dystopian manual, and in my gut I felt the shift from petty bureaucracy to something uglier. The drone's first close call with us happened on a Monday while Sage was on a blanket in the yard reading. It drifted low, then lower until she could see her reflection in the lens. She ran inside and the air went electric. Garrett stood on the sidewalk with the controller and a smugness that belonged in a bad movie. "Public airspace," he said. "We're checking for violations." He tapped his clipboard like it was a shield. When a drone starts treating your yard like an exhibit, you document everything. I started lining up my own cameras, not for paranoia, but for evidence. People mess with you all the time when they wear power like armor. What I didn't expect was that the drone wouldn't just annoy us. It would reveal a whole criminal operation. It got worse. The drone followed kids to bus stops, hovered over sleeping toddlers, and once the thing that finally made my skin crawl, it pressed its lens against Sage's second-story bedroom window while 3 girls were getting ready for a sleepover. I saw Garrett below staring up with the broadest, most satisfied grin you'd ever imagine on someone violating human decency. That was the night the last thread of my patience snapped. I didn't beat a drum of righteousness. I grabbed an old paintball gun from the garage, loaded it, and when that mechanical vulture hovered 3 feet from Sage's window, I squeezed the trigger. The paintball hit the gimbal in a burst of orange, the rotors went into a shriek, and the drone fell into my rose bushes like a metal bird finally taught the meaning of gravity. It was a beautiful, ridiculous sound. Garrett ran over wild-eyed. "You destroyed property," he sputtered. $3,000. Fine. He was filming my child getting dressed through glass. He was stalking children. I picked the memory card out of the wreckage before he could blink. Evidence is evidence. If you're going to expose a predator, you keep your receipts. That tiny card changed everything. The footage I pulled off it was worse than harassment. It was systematic, targeted, and sick. Clips of neighborhood families, hours of footage focused on bedrooms, bathrooms, kids' routines, timestamps that showed pattern and intent. And it wasn't just voyeurism. The files showed Delilah and Garrett trespassing, planting staged violations, photographing the setups, and then issuing fines the next day. We'd been watching a crooked little machine manufacturing misery and cashing in on foreclosure opportunities. I called my lawyer friend Jake. He came over that night, jaw dropping lower with every file. "Rex," he said, "this is organized fraud." We cross-checked property records, 3 houses foreclosed after amassed fines bought at sheriff sales, then resold by a company tied to Delilah. It read like a scam: manufacture a violation, fine the family, until they default, buy the property, flip it for profit. I felt like I'd tripped and pulled the cord that detonated a big, ugly secret. We didn't go stealthy about it. Jake told me to call the federal folks, and within a week we had the attention we needed. A federal attorney came by, eyes bright like someone who loves tidy prosecutions. She looked at our mountain of footage and paperwork and actually smiled. This, she said, is about as clear-cut as it gets. While the investigators prepared their case, the HOA tried everything they could think of to scare us into silence. They slapped me with a ludicrous fine for destroying HOA property and filed a restraining order. Someone keyed my van. Anonymous letters smeared my name around the neighborhood. There were attempts at intimidation, late-night trespasses, and even a ridiculous attempt to retroactively rewrite covenants to legalize the surveillance. Desperation makes people stupid, and stupid people make excellent evidence. We set a trap. I planted a garden gnome deliberately a hair inside the covenant line and waited. Cameras with overlapping fields and cloud backups recorded Garrett sneaking onto my property at 2 in the morning, arranging fake violations, photographing them, and muttering about teaching me a lesson. He confessed on mic, basically in a defeated whisper, "This will teach that troublemaker." He didn't know the microphones had been listening. We presented the evidence at an HOA meeting. I went in expecting more glares. I walked out with the board's criminal case. I connected my laptop to the projector, clicked play, and the room watched Garrett and Delilah at work, planting evidence, stalking kids, creating financial ruin. The footage was cold and precise. When federal agents stood, identified themselves, and moved in, the meeting turned into a live arrest scene. People gasped, phones recorded, neighbors who'd sat silent for months finally talked. Handcuffs clicked. The air tasted like vindication. They were indicted: mail theft, trespass, fraud, invasion of privacy, conspiracy. The restitution came back into the neighborhood in checks with numbers that made neighbors cry. Money returned, foreclosures reversed, a dissolved HOA board that had operated like a shadow government. The community reconstituted with real protections, votes on spending limits, on surveillance, transparent financials. We even changed how we handled disputes. Accountability replaced arbitrary power. People often ask me what the lesson was. For me, it wasn't just that documentation beats intimidation, though it does. It was that community matters. When a few of us started recording, sharing footage, and showing up for one another, the whole thing unraveled. The people who thought they could weaponize authority against neighbors discovered that authority cuts both ways, and when abused, it can and should be exposed. Sage rebuilt her life. She started a privacy awareness group at school and helped organize drone-free days where kids fly kites and families picnic without being watched. Mrs. Finley got her home back. Her foreclosure was dismissed with a settlement that gave her peace of mind and a small scholarship fund for immigrant families. The money that had funded the surveillance toys was redirected into a playground where the only gaze is a parent smiling, not a camera's cold stare. I ended up on the new board director of oversight and common sense because someone had to make sure the next committee didn't turn into a mini regime. We instituted clear legal rules about surveillance, and we made sure every expenditure over a few $100s required a vote. That wasn't revenge. It was repair. If there's a moral, it's this: power without accountability is a dangerous thing, and complacency is what lets it take root. When neighbors are afraid to speak, tyrants of small things fill the silence. But when people share evidence, speak up, and work with the right authorities, systems meant to help can be fixed. Justice isn't always glamorous. It's paperwork and patience and the stubborn muscle memory of folks who know how to use a camera. So here's the question I want to leave you with, because this isn't just our story, it's a pattern some people live with. What would you do if someone used authority to terrorize your family? Would you quietly pay, move, or fight back? Tell me what you think, or better yet, share a time you stood up to misuse of power. And if you've ever had to document wrongs to make them stop, tell that story. People need to know how to protect the people they love.